Well, it's Wednesday, July 5th, the day after July 4th in the US. It's the US Independence Day. Um, and I just got back from a week and a half of vacation and ready to kick off a new YouTube. This one's going to be fairly technical. We're going to talk about vitamin D. It was an article in the New England Journal that basically said vitamin D supplementation doesn't decrease risk for hip fracture. And that may be true, but it may not. We're going to go in and it's going to be a lot of obviously vitamin D is a big topic for our audience, but epidemiology is as well, learning how to read a study. So we go in and we look at the pros and cons on the epidemiology of the study, and it really does. You come out of that study thinking, we were just discussing it a minute ago, thinking, the New England Journal is really good. They've got great competition to get into to present science there, and they've got good referees. But you wonder why they printed this one. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the shorts. The long form today is a favorite topic of mine. The number one risk of Alzheimer's. I get patients typically come to see me for things like, well, doc, I had a calcium score and it was 1,000, or I think I'm getting insulin resistant. I think I might have some diabetes or something. I'd like to get it checked out. I'm afraid I'm going to have a heart attack. And within a few months, they get comfortable that I've stabilized my heart attack risk and minimized it. I'm not really that worried about a heart attack. Here's my concern long term. I'm going to add a couple of decades of healthy life, but can I make sure that I'm not going to get a disability associated with Alzheimer's, cognitive decline? We used to do a lot of work. There's a fellow named Dale Bredesen. We used to do a lot of work with his program. And we just got so busy in terms of the physician partners Medicare Advantage program that we could not juggle all of that. As we're expanding again, we're starting to crank up. We may actually get back deeper into the Alzheimer's cognitive decline programs. Part of the problem with them before was that they were so personnel intensive. Now we're starting to bring on more personnel, so we'll be looking at that over the next few months. But this is going into depth in terms of the association between prediabetes, diabetes, insulin resistance, and Alzheimer's. It was interesting. I was one of Bredesen's training programs for his network of Alzheimer's providers. He came up and asked me after a 2-day training program on it, and he said, "What did you think?" And I said, "Well, I was trying to be polite, but raise my major concern." And that was, I said, we had 2 days here, and about half an hour to an hour was on prediabetes, insulin resistance. And he looked at me and he said, "Yeah." And I said, well, again, being overly polite, I said, "Well, in my mind, at least half of Alzheimer's is associated with prediabetes." And he immediately jumped in and he said, "No, I don't think so." He said, "I think it's all associated with prediabetes and diabetes," which is closer to what I had felt too, at least my understanding at the time. And then he went into a mechanism that I was very much aware of. He didn't expect me to be, but it's something that's very intriguing to me. He said, there's a thing for people that have Alzheimer's. We think there's a thing called central nervous system insulin resistance. See, the brain forms memories using insulin. Insulin is part of the memory forming mechanism. In fact, there were a couple of universities, especially Wake Forest, that did some research on inhaled nasal insulin to help people with Alzheimer's form memories. It didn't work. The studies did not work, so they're not really proceeding with those, at least at this point. But it raises the issue of central nervous system insulin resistance. Now, what he didn't know, and what I didn't bring up and discuss with Bredesen, was that in my mind, a lot of these people that he and his folks thought didn't have, in air quotes, didn't have insulin resistance, actually had insulin resistance, but just were not being diagnosed. So, as you see, there's a huge set of stories and interactions between insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, and Alzheimer's risks. But before I take too much of Jesus's thunder, I'm going to back off and let Jesus take it away.
It's great being with you today, Dr. Brewer, and with all the viewers watching the show today. And pardon if I have a slow Wi-Fi connection. For some reason, it's slower than other days. Uh, but with a really interesting topic, and I was just telling Dr. Brewer, I love that story about Alzheimer's and insulin resistance. I can say that was my introduction to the topic. The very first time you told me that story, and it gets you to study, it gets you to read even more and to understand a little bit more about why this is important. And when you see the long form topic, you will find out how we are mentioning this, because Alzheimer's is one of the it's probably isn't the number one cause of dementia and cognitive decline in the world. And it's pretty interesting because if you go to the National Health National Institutes of Health website and you look for causes of Alzheimer, you don't see insulin resistance nowhere there.
Mm.
You will see age, you will see genetics, and then you will see lifestyle, of course. And between the lines, you will read hypertension, diabetes, and all the other stuff. So they know, but the way the message is being brought out, it's not as clear as it probably should be.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll interrupt and say you give. I think maybe you give them too much credit when you say they know. They know that it's got that constellation of chronic diseases, but I'm not sure that they do know that that constellation of chronic diseases involves such a baseline of insulin resistance as a common denominator.
yeah, and as you mentioned, even on the congresses, you see that um, they don't address it as firmly as probably should be addressed. But just kind of going back to the introduction to the channel. If you're new to the channel, this is your first time seeing this YouTube live. This is kind of the stuff that you're going to find in this channel. It's all about cardiovascular prevention, preventing heart attacks and strokes. Dr. Brewer has made this one of his life goals, providing information that is saving lives for free. On previous topics, last week we discussed high triglycerides and plaque reversal using supplements. A really interesting supplement that is on research, especially for folks who are having heart issues because of really high triglyceride problems. We also reviewed the statin LP little a paradox, a study that was suggesting that taking statin is going to increase your LP little a levels and therefore increasing your risk of a heart attack. And we kind of beat too much into that article. It's an interesting discussion for you to take a look at. Very similar
We
to
we bashed on it a little bit, didn't we?
a little bit, and also on the Harvard guys and their recommendations about glycemic versus non-glycemic carbs.
Did I bash on
Uh,
the Harvard guys too?
just a little bit. And we were just discussing that it's interesting how you can have these big institutions of health and you will have very very intelligent, very smart people, very people that are experts on the field. But information that is on the website might not match the ideas of the academics that are actually working and doing the day-to-day job with patients right there.
And Mayo is, did I say Mayo? And Mayo is bad about that.
Yeah,
I don't think the Mayo website guys talk to the clinicians at all.
yeah, yeah. So be careful to with what you're reading on the on internet. And we also discussed high intensity interval training and heart disease prevention. We have had this question a lot, like, what is HIIT? How can I do HIIT correctly? Is this really going to help me or not? Where's the science? And you will see that the YouTube Live is all about the science and identifying some interesting articles that we want to share with you, and so you can make your own choices. Um, Kind of an introduction. If you would like to be a patient from the practice and Dr. Brewer, and we have other providers that are being taught the way to do prevention and being taught and trained by Dr. Brewer directly, and you have traditional Medicare, go ahead and visit the website, prepmedhealth.com. You just have to go there. We had new team members that have done a wonderful job with the website, making it more simple, more accessible, not so much, not so not reducing the amount of confusion that you might have according to people who have told us, hey, there are just too many options, or know where to click. Just go to the website, click on book appointment. You will have to sign a quick form right there. It's going to ask you if you have Medicare or not. We're accepting traditional Medicare now, and this is a good option for you to get access to care and get a specific consultation for your specific case. That's something we cannot do on the YouTube channel. If you are not on Medicare and you visit the website, just click on book appointment. You can put in there that you would like to pay cash instead, and we can get you scheduled as well to see Dr. Brewer. I can tell you, we are booked for the month right now, and August is basically the same thing. So we have had a lot of response, and we're very happy that we can be helping Dr. Brewer saving lives both in the YouTube channel and both on an individual basis.
You know, you bring up the point, and part of the website still says that you can get care through me. That still is available. I'm still our major provider, but I cannot as be the only doc for all the folks that are coming in now. And folks will say, well, I want Dr. Brewer to take care. I don't know that I trust the system. Let me tell you something. I've spent a career of being a chief medical officer. We've got two other providers right now. They're both really good. They both know the system. And we've got a huge number of quality programs that we've set up. Just as a background, I've spent most of my life as a serial chief medical officer, CMO. So at MD Live, I had 800 docs and 800 doctors that I was responsible for managing. At Premise, it was 700 plus a whole bunch of nurse practitioners. And so I also currently do the same thing with K Health and with MD Live. I consult with all of those companies on how to develop quality systems to make sure that your providers are doing the right things. And so we'd be more than happy to talk about how we manage quality, how we make sure that you get the very best experience.
You're retired after all.
That's
Well, you're
right.
supposed to be retired.
That's right.
And I can tell you from my own experience, Dr. Brewer is one of the most hardworking persons I know, after me. And
After you, there you go. There we go. Put a little
no,
honesty in there.
the truth is, it's I can tell you do as well as a doctor. I mean, I'm not licensed to practice in the U.S. I don't practice medicine for U.S. patients, but I can tell you, you learn a lot. You learn a different way to do prevention that what you get taught on the school, and you see the impact that you can make on people. And it's just impressive the amount of people that say no other doctor has ever told me these things, and just kind of getting some directions on what to do and getting the freedom to make your own choices, because you don't even get that with other doctors and our practitioners. The people that are going into the team and that they're being trained by Dr. Brewer, I can tell you from my perspective as well, they're really really good. All right, so let's go to the vitamin D benefits. So this is a study. Uh, this was covered by Peter Attia a few months back as well. He had some interesting remarks. We have some different ones to mention about this one. And in this study published on the New England Journal of Medicine, just like Dr. Brewer mentioned in the introduction, they wanted to find association between vitamin D supplementation and if it will benefit or reduce the risk of getting a fracture. The main thing to remember on this study is that they did not did a controlled randomized clinical trial, meaning they were not um, getting the people themselves or making the measurements themselves or making a different design of the study themselves. They were basically taking information from the vital study, which is a broader study on different impacts of vitamin D, including 25,000 people. And just like a summary of the results, they found out that almost 2,000 fractures in 1,500 people were found in an average of 5.3 years of follow up. And the conclusions basically, they mentioned that supplementing with vitamin D 2,000 units daily did not show any significant impact on preventing fractures. Um, then I'm going to ask you to bear with me a little bit with the slides because they're kind of loaded on lines. But these are basically the thoughts of Dr. Brewer on a slide.
So if I could clarify, so I went I went a little. I usually don't give so many comments when I send an article to Jesus, but this time I got obsessive compulsive, I think, and got very detailed. So Jesus just went ahead and provided it. We'll give a lot more verbal there to help explain the comments when we get there.
Sure. And I mean, the New England Journal is not, by all means, a bad journal, not at all. And I think what I see here is kind of what we call a post hoc analysis from a study. So they're basically taking information from other study and managing the data to find other associations or relationship between different variables, meaning vitamin D and fractures, basically. So part of the comments from Dr. Brewer. So did the research achieve a difference in vitamin D levels over the course of the study? We don't know. We don't have that information. Vitamin D was measured in fewer than 25 participants at follow up, and only a fraction of those participants had also provided baseline samples. So whenever that's what we call kind of a follow up, or if you have a case control study or you have different types of study, you wanna know what the baseline is for your population, what's the results after the intervention, and we don't get that on this study. um, this around 10% of the total study provided baseline data. Other subset of this information, they said they experienced vitamin D increase from 29.2 nanograms to 41.2 after 2 years, while the placebo group did not. So, how can we make sure that the results can be generalized to the entire population of the study? We are not sure about that either. Uh, by using bone fractures, which are relatively rare on a null or non events as the outcome of interest, only 2,600 of the 25,000 participants provided baseline and follow up samples, and only 1,500 experienced fractures during the course of the study. So this is less than 10%, and you can see that even on their own graph, the cumulative incidence is less than 6%. And so it's conceivable that these two populations had no overlap at all. While such an extreme would be statistically unlikely, we nevertheless cannot know the extent to which the data from one of these groups might apply to the other one. So, what we're saying right here is that we have no way to really make sure that the populations between placebo and vitamin D are really as similar as they claiming it to be. Even though they are kind of the same numbers, to that 12,000 versus 12,000, um, the type of people and the individual characteristics of each person, each subject on both groups are very likely to be different from each other.
So, if I could repeat and maybe paraphrase some of that.
Sure.
So one thing, and I don't even know that I mentioned this before. I don't think I have. You can let me know if we cover a little bit later. One of the other challenges is they're saying they got uh, a difference from 29 to 41. And that's also assuming that that's going to be clinically a significant difference. And if they did, if you think about that and you say, well, I don't understand what you're saying. So what if they clinically got a difference of 29 to 30 or 32 to 33? It would be much more obvious that, wait a minute, is that clinically a significant difference in levels anyway? Well, when you think about vitamin D levels, we see people come in all the time and we know they're at risk when they're in the teens. We assume they're at risk when they're in the low 20s. As you start to get 30 and above, most labs will say that's a normal level. And so you go from one level, which most labs will say is normal, 29, to another level, which most labs will say is normal, 41. Maybe that's not enough of a difference to see any significant change in something like fracture risk. So that's item number one. And then do we cover that on other slides, Jesus?
You mentioned it right there on this one,
Okay.
but you made a really good explanation point for that specific
Okay.
map.
Then the other thing is that there's a stretch. If you'll go back, there's a stretch which Jesus talked about here. The study sounds like, oh, it's huge. We've got 25,871 quote participants. Well, that really depends on how you define participant. If you define participant as someone who gave you a baseline level, averaging 29, and someone who gave you a follow-up level, again, averaging 41, you really only had, what was it, 2,600. About 10% of that actually gave samples for both baseline and follow-up. So then as you see, your numbers begin to shrink by a factor of 10. The next thing, and that's not terrible. You don't have to argue with that too much, but again, we're just piling up concerns about this study and the temptation to think it conclusively disproves value of vitamin D. The second thing that you look at, and Jesus brought up a minute ago, was what's the outcome that we're worried about? Here, we're worried about, obviously, they didn't look at risk for diabetes. They didn't look at sleep-related things. We didn't look at things that are often associated with health and vitamin D. They looked at one item, which is really hard to mess up out of subjectivity or not finding it: a fractured hip. The problem with that, the advantage of looking at fractured hips only is it's not subjective. Either you have a fracture or you don't. But there's a major disadvantage with looking at hip fractures only because out of the whole population of 25,871, there were only 1,500 fractures. Once you start getting down to the 2,600 people that were actual participants that gave baseline plus follow-up studies levels, uh, it's not clear, but if you do the math and go backwards, it looks like less than 100 actually had fractures. So again, a statistically okay number, but not nearly what it sounds like coming out of the blocks where you've got 26,000 participants. I'll be quiet and let you go.
No, that's perfect because that's exactly the kind of issues that you, whenever you're looking into a scientific article, you wanna make yourself that type of questions. And we know we and it's gonna I bring this person on bring this person on every YouTube live. I think kind of a practice for me to to learn how to pronounce the last name, Doctor Lo, Ioannidis.
Oh, Ioannidis. Yeah, he's that Greek last
I
name.
need to
John
practice more,
Ioannidis.
but you will see how it's hard to create scientific evidence that doesn't have any limitations. It's barely impossible,
Right.
and any research is going to have limitation. That's why you will almost always on the conclusions of every article it will say we need more research, right? Because then you have to develop new methodology that will compensate for the errors of previous research. But that's just the way that research world works.
So
Um,
for those of you, if you watch the channel a lot, we refer to him a lot. You may remember it, but if you haven't, Jesus is referring to, I think it's John Ioannidis,
John.
Ionnedis or something like that. He's a professor of medicine and epidemiology at Stanford, and he wrote what was for a long time the most downloaded article off of PLOS, the Public Library of Science, and that article was titled something like "Most Published Research is Wrong." And you begin to look, I mean, it sounds outlandish when you hear the title alone, but once you get into the details, you begin to see exactly what Jesus is talking about. It's like, number one, if it's something that's proving what we already know, that's not publishable. And then you start getting into, okay, if it's a surprise, was it really real? And there's so many ways that it might not be.
That's
Go
for
ahead.
sure. Now, other stuff to mention about this specific article. I'm gonna go back here really quick to this one. We don't know how the intervention was monitored. Basically, we believe it wasn't monitored, just adherence to the supplementation because, as we mentioned, this is not a randomized control trial where you are following and tracking adherence to supplements. In this case, they're relying on self-reporting questionnaires, which might be flawed. And even though they're reporting a 85.4% average at 5 years follow-up, which is really good, how reliable is the data they are collecting based on just questionnaires? And we have covered multiple questionnaires studies in the past, and even on those ones we have mentioned, for example, nutritional studies. When you are measuring or trying to measure the impact of a specific diets, those are going to have that same problem because you are relying on what the people tell you they're eating, and that might be real or might not be real. Also, the outcome of interest was also measured by self-reporting. Self-reports of fractures are far less likely to be associated with significant memory errors than self-reports of vitamin intake. Further, authors did verify most fracture reports against medical records, and I mean, there's certain ways on how you get the information that can make a study more reliable or not.
So, Jesus, at the end of the day, um, as you know, we'll often go through the science, the pros and cons when a patient's asking what they should do. And then at the end of all that, they patiently listen to us go on and on and on and on. And then they say, yeah, well, what would you do?
Yeah. I think it's just part of this big world of information that you get. So the main problem that I have seen, and we have seen that in multiple articles, once an article get to a more mainstream media, and then you see them on Healthline or Med News Today or something like that, and they come with this flashy title of researchers from XYZ Academy say that vitamin D doesn't work. And if you just read the title, you might you might go with the wrong assumption. And we like not to go on kind of the opposite sides, or we are more like conservative on this perspective on saying we don't think vitamin D doesn't work for fractures. I think it's just a matter of getting the best amount of vitamin D, but you cannot rely on vitamin D alone to prevent fractures. There are other multiple factors that you need to be considering, such as your body weight, body fat, if you have osteoporosis and if you need calcium supplementation or not, the kind of activities that you do, the genetics, and just aging. So it's never just one supplement that is going to take you out from any problem. They're just help. They're just other stuff that is going to help you to get to your objective.
Well, I'll paraphrase too. I think I would I'm thinking the same thing you are. And that is number one, I'm taking vitamin D. I started with 5,000 international units a day. And I take it to keep a level between 60 and 80, 60 and 90. The other thing I do is keep my weight down, but I also do a lot of resistance training.
Yep. And just another thing that we haven't mentioned. Um, in this case, we're talking specifically about fractures, and we might want to cover this, Dr. Brewer, as well in the future. But there are multiple mechanisms on which vitamin D is decreasing inflammation, and
Hmm.
we do recommend vitamin D for those purposes specifically. Of course, it might help with fractures, but the more important thing we use it for is to preventing cardiovascular disease. It impacts inflammation through different mechanisms, and it would be a good idea to cover that in the future, just so people know, hey, I know I'm taking vitamin D. Dr. Brewer says it's a good idea to take vitamin D, but I don't know why I'm taking it specifically, right? Sometimes we get that a lot. People that are taking 10, 15 supplements, and they just know, well, I know it's good for my body. I don't know specifically why, but I know it's good for my body.
That's a good point, and it reminds me of the next topic, the long form topic about insulin resistance and Alzheimer's. And again, I think we're going to get to the end of that presentation, and you'll be saying the same thing. One thing we really didn't cover that deeply is the impact of insulin resistance and inflammation on the central nervous system.
Definitely. And if you're new to the channel, again, thank you so much for staying with us for this half an hour. This is kind of the model of these YouTube lives. We have just so many topics to cover that what we did is to decide to create a short version, a short topic. In this case, was a little bit longer than usual, and then our main topic, which is what we're gonna cover right now. So, Gilbert, if you want to give us the water ball, so we can start with the number one risk factor for Alzheimer's. All right. So Let's start with some introduction to Alzheimer's disease. As we mentioned at the beginning, it's the most common type of dementia in 2020. In 2020, affected almost 6 million of Americans and is expected to triple by 2016. 2060. There are multiple studies suggesting that there's an association between type 2 diabetes and the pathophysiology of an incidence of Alzheimer's, meaning uh, the root cause of Alzheimer's, as we mentioned, might be more related to type 2 diabetes and, better said, to insulin resistance rather than other factors. This study was published on Biomedicine 2022 by a group of Greek researchers and it's titled Type 2 Diabetes as a Risk Factor for Alzheimer's Disease, a review and meta analysis. And as we have mentioned in the past, a meta analysis is basically a bigger study that is getting multiple studies from elsewhere, analyzes the data, sees how familiar, how similar are on design, and they track if they can compare results within each other. And basically, it's a summary of the findings of other research. Uh,
Before you go, are you up for an interruption?
no, go ahead.
Before you go to the next page, those of us listening, Jesus does what I do. He tries to define scientific words and sometimes forgets. He defined meta-analysis, but he didn't define pathophysiology very well. And as usual, you just break the root words down. Uh, ology means study of, physi means how something works, and patho means bad or disease. So basically, pathophysiology means the mechanism of how the disease happens. So, what that's talking about is what is it about type 2 diabetes that helps create Alzheimer's disease? That's what this is, type 2 diabetes and pathophysiology of Alzheimer's.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brewer. And I do it even less now. I sometimes in the past I used to put a lot of medical jargon over there.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
always a challenge.
let's talk about the results on this study. So in this meta-analysis, they included 18 studies, and just so you know how this works, they go ahead and they research multiple databases, and they found like 2,000 studies overall. Then they start dissecting and differentiating. They have some criteria to include the study, and they sometimes end up with 5, 10, 20 studies out of a pool of thousands. So they choose 18 studies that they thought were high quality studies for this purpose, and those 18 studies included more 4 million subjects overall. Uh, when you see those results on a statistical basis, risk ratios, odds ratio on um, HR, I got what one of what Dr. Brewer calls a senior moment, hazard radio.
Hmm.
Um, those ones are basically different ways to measure association, how one thing might be related to another one. It doesn't mean causation, but it's one of the more important and more um, we can say with confidence that those things are related. Um, on those studies, they found numbers from 1.18 up to 3 or 4, meaning that there's a 1.5, 1.2, 2 or 3 more probability, two times more probability for one thing to be related to the other one. That's what they're saying. Only one study was below 1, meaning no significant association. And they were comparing basically and saying, okay, how related is insulin resistance to Alzheimer's? And most of the studies, almost all of the studies, concluded that there is an association between insulin resistance and the development of Alzheimer's. And you can see it right here on this whisker plot. The middle line It's just no association. uh, the left side will say, hey, actually the people who has insulin resistance have less risk of Alzheimer's. And when you see this study is going to the left, to the right, I'm sorry, to the right of your screen, that is saying, okay, people that has insulin resistance or diabetes are very most likely to develop Alzheimer's. So this is what the study is suggesting. The study says, okay, so we found out that a lot of people who have abnormal glucose metabolism have an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's in the general population. They point out two different things that you will need to be aware of. One is publication bias. That is, they will be choosing studies that only match their assumption. So this is not the case. But what they found is that there is heterogeneity regarding the definition of abnormal glucose metabolism, meaning there are differences between each study on how they um, measured and identified abnormal glucose metabolism. Some of them used A1C, some of them used fasting glucose, some of them used OGTT, some of them used insulin response. So there are some differences in there. And even with those differences, I will say that if they're not using oral glucose tolerance test, they're very likely to be undermining the risk then,
Mm.
because you will find that a lot of people might have a normal A1C, but they are really pretty insulin resistant. And so that I will say that will set the balance going further into insulin resistance being associated with Alzheimer's.
Couple of points before you move on. Number one, so people, like you said, this is a whisker plot. It basically shows what was seen in terms of significance for the study. Each of those data points is a study. The whiskers on either side are statistical significance, two standard deviations, one above, one below. And as you begin to look at that, below one is no association. So if there were no association between insulin resistance or diabetes um, and Alzheimer's, what you would expect is all of the data points would be below that vertical line at one or below. And as you see, I mean, there's none of them below. The other point that I think is critical is just what Jesus said. They are using all kinds of different definitions of, quote, diabetes, end quote. When you do what we do in terms of getting an insulin survey on everybody, you realize that people that walk in the door that are labeled with diabetes are, what would you say, 10% of the people that have some form of insulin resistance?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like 90% of this problem is underreported. Given that fact, you would not be surprised at all if there were a significant association, but it's still getting missed because the vast majority of the risk factor is not being picked up.
You have a lot of people with blood glucose, fasting blood glucose below 100. A1C is on 6.4, 6.2, even 5s. And you get them challenged with an oral glucose tolerance test, and their glucose levels go through the roof, about 200.
Yeah.
Insulin numbers about 50, 100, and they're not feeling anything, or they may be feeling tired or with weakness and uh, issues with memory, other stuff, and they're basically suffering from insulin resistance, and they just don't know it. And you might have a lot of people on this group, on this specific study, that might be dealing with the same thing, and they're developing Alzheimer's. and you might even in this study you might lose, they might have lost a lot of them.
Yeah. So even though they have Alzheimer's, they're listed as they didn't have the risk factor, up to 90% of them, because they weren't, quote, labeled as diabetic. but they had clearly had raving insulin resistance. It just wasn't measured.
just by the numbers. And even in the same study, and this is one of the main issues with how to detect and identify insulin resistance, because if you rely on A1C, if you rely on a fasting glucose, you're very likely to miss it. And here, what the discussion brings up on the conversation is how is that insulin resistance is actually involved with Alzheimer's. So what you will see is that there are insulin receptors, meaning cells that have a portion of them that are they have affinity to insulin, and they are abundantly on the hypothalamus, on the cortex, and the hippocampus, that and the olfactory bulb and other places. And those are just parts of the brain that are really, really related to hormones, to memory, to movement, to sensitivity. And the insulin resistance involves that the pancreas is increasing insulin release. That's one of the very first things that you will detect if you measure insulin, and not even fasting insulin. Fasting insulin might be okay, but
Right.
if you challenge that, you will have increases of insulin after eating, and those that insulin will go into the blood-brain barrier, and the amount of insulin that enters the brain might, at the beginning, will increase and then might decrease. The blood brain barrier might not be capable of manage of that insulin. This is what we call brain insulin resistance. What Dr. Brewer mentioned that at the beginning. And I was just discussing with Dr. Brewer something that I didn't put on the slides, but what happens here is that you have some particles that are very related to Alzheimer's that are called AB plaques. And those AB plaques, this is a different plaque than the heart. This is just a different thing. And that usually gets regulated by another protein, another enzyme on the brain. But once you have a lot of insulin going on, that other protein that is a protective factor will have to deal with both the insulin and these AB plaques. And these AB plaques start to accumulate and start to creating more damage on the brain cells. And that's what brings and what part of what it starts developing the root cause or starting to produce the dementia symptoms and Alzheimer's issues. Uh, Hyperglycemia, high levels of glucose, and the involvement of other enzymes in the brain, as I just mentioned, and the low impact of GLP-1s, meaning there are GLP-1s that are there are enzymes that we have covered in the past. They get produced on the gut, but they can be also produced and can be increased on the brain as well on a natural basis. They get just too much insulin to handle by themselves, and there is a decrease on the processes of autophagy. There is endothelial damage, meaning damaging the inner wall of the cell on the brain. There's inflammation. There is oxidative stress, and all of that, all of those circumstances start impacting the health of the brain and producing the Alzheimer's disease. Now, GLP-1s, there are now new GLP-1 agonists. We have talked about them multiple times. Ozempic, Mounjaro is another type, but it's more of a trincretin. Ribelsus, I think, is the other name for Ozempic. And
Ribelsis is the only oral GLP-1 that we have at this point. They're working on a couple of new ones now, but that's the only
yeah,
one that's available for prescription at this point. And again,
and
what these um, are those enzymes that Jesus is talking about that uh, help control diabetes or decrease diabetes, but seem to be not functioning effectively in those of us with insulin resistance.
exactly right. And we have talked about the benefits of using GLP-1s both for weight loss, for insulin resistance, for glucose metabolism. But even at least on a theoretical basis, according to this article, there is a positive impact of increasing the levels of GLP-1s on the brain. And it's the same idea. If you are decreasing insulin resistance in the body, you can do that on the brain with GLP-1s, at least theoretically. Of course, there are more studies that need to be done on this regard. Uh, but this is part of the phenomenon. This a specific mechanism and this view of the inner cell has been done on mice. So that's why you don't see it ready to be extrapolated for all the population. Just a way that researchers are trying to explain why insulin resistance is impacting too much on the development of Alzheimer and why we're seeing this type of result on population-based studies. Uh, but one thing I learned with Dr. Brewer, and this is something that I didn't know at the time, is you look for that. And if you look for type 3 diabetes, that's going to lead you to Alzheimer's just because of the mechanism or how the disease gets developed. Anything
You
to
thought
add,
I was
Dr.
going to
Brewer?
jump in with a comment, didn't you?
I would love to because
But
I do
you're
my
right.
best. I do my best trying to explain this stuff. Sometimes I just get I go into a very technical bunny hole, and I don't want my technicalities get in the way of explaining the more important thing related to this.
Well, yeah, that's why I love having you on board so much. This is difficult stuff to try to, on one hand, talk about cutting edge medical science and medicine, and then on the other hand, cutting it down to something that's really clear to folks that haven't spent hours and days and months and years and decades in that space. Because unfortunately, I mean, we can't depend on our current medical group manpower. They're just too overworked to stay in touch with all of the new stuff. And the to get back to the point you were bringing up a minute ago, this connection between diabetes, insulin resistance, and Alzheimer's or cognitive decline has become so strong that cutting edge medical scientists are calling um, Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes.
And I was going to say a comment, and I don't want this to seem that now I'm bashing to other specialists. You talked about guacamole medicine, right? Can you talk a little
Guacamole.
bit more about? Can you talk a little bit more about that? I think you can explain that more than I do.
I didn't come up with that. I think it was David Sinclair
Mm-hmm.
was talking about whack-a-mole medicine. And actually, that brings up a good point. We should go back and get that group of slides that demonstrates exactly what's going on. If you look at, so you've got neurologists, and at about age 40, they don't really have that much. They have a little bit of stuff during birth, and then not so much until about age 40. And then diseases start picking up at age 50 and 60 and then 70. And then it just really starts going up like that. Cardiologists, a whole different specialist, a whole different organ system. Again, you get a blip around birth time and then nothing, no disease until about age 40. And then it starts cranking up 50, 60, 70, and it just, again, hockey puck. What's the next disease? Oh, renal medicine, kidney doctors, same thing. Something when we go through the whole process of being born, there's a blips there, and then nothing until the 40s, and then you get that hockey stick. What else am I not thinking about? The eye doctors, same thing. And all of these doctors study organ systems. They don't study. You don't have any doctors that really focus on the cell, and that is the problem. These issues, these chronic diseases that are occurring, they're quote normal processes of aging, aren't normal. Most of them aren't nearly as quote normal as we think. That's the real opportunity. They are aging processes within the cells, which are causing a multitude of diseases. And so the whole concept about whack-a-mole is you deal with the brain problem, and then you're going to get a heart problem. You deal with the heart problem, you're going to get an eye problem. You deal with an eye problem, you're going to get a kidney problem. And there is, again, a common denominator here, and that's the cell. and the cell's inability um, uh, to manage insulin resistance. That's the major component of this. There are other components as well. Um, David Sinclair did a great job in terms of looking at multiple different types of cellular aging, which I won't go down that bunny hole, but there's about 9 or 10 bunny holes there. Information, how DNA gets jumbled up, the mitochondria and problems associated with that, autophagy. Um, but again, one of the biggest ones being inability to manage or to metabolize carbohydrates.
And thank you, Dr. Burr, because that's something that I wanted to bring to the people this time. And if you go to each specialty, they're really good on their field. No question
Mm-hmm.
about that. They studied that for years, and they know the really specific things, and they can get you from a lot of trouble. That's for sure. But then when you see this type of topics, and then you think there are a lot of neurologists out there that are not too familiar with insulin resistance and how to identify that and deal with that. That's the issue, because
Yeah.
they're really good on treating the symptom, on treating the consequences on the best of their abilities. But then you have to go back to the root causes, and they're not trained to do that. That's why you're supposed to have at least general practitioners that go out from med school, or family medicine doctors, and then you have preventative medicine doctors, and everybody do prevention in a different way. And we forget one of the more common things and one of the root causes, and not everybody is trained enough to deal with this stuff. And that's one of the issues of actual medical care. I know there was a specialty. I don't know if that's a thing on the U.S. still. In Mexico, when it lasted for a couple of years, it was called integrative medicine.
Mm.
And the idea behind that was to combine all these root causes and try to figure out a way to make a more integral way to do prevention. And it didn't last long on Mexico. I don't think we understood the concept. I don't know in the US that's still a thing.
Integrative medicine is more of a grassroots type of approach. It's been poorly organized in terms of academics. Um, Given my role, I used to run the program at Johns Hopkins on teaching, training doctors coming through preventive medicine. It tended to lean a lot towards public health, which was okay, but it tends to be bureaucratic and swallowed up in government bureaucracies. Um, the academic rigor behind the preventive side just wasn't as wasn't as good as you saw in a lot of the most of the other specialties. You still see that problem. So you see other groups coming in. Uh, Again, given my role, I trained a couple of the presidents of the American College of Preventive Medicine, a couple of the recent past presidents, and they used to complain and whine and fuss about other groups like uh, oh gosh, functional medicine docs coming in and trying to poach in their space. And I've been to some functional medicine groups. In fact, Dale Bredesen's training program was taken up and endorsed and organized within the functional medicine groups. Academically, they have not been as rigorous. Their epidemiology side, the folks that look at um, and provide a canon or quality associated with the science, is not as good in that group as it is in the other preventive medicine groups. But it's still just not strong enough.
All right. So bottom line, the thing we talked about too much and a lot on this channel, and we need to keep talking about it because I think we are saving more and more lives whenever we discuss that. Insulin resistance is more dangerous than you might think. And I'm gonna steal your thunder right now, Dr. Brewer. This is a quote from Dr. Brewer, not mine. If your doctor tells you that you have a touch of sugar, be afraid, be very afraid, because as you see, Just a touch of sugar, insulin resistance, can lead you to a really, really ugly path of heart disease. And now we're talking about Alzheimer's. That I can say it might be even worse. If you get a heart attack and you end up there with a heart attack, okay, I mean it shouldn't happen that way, but at least it ended. It's worse when you are living on this world and you don't even remember a thing. The pain, the struggle for yourself and your family, it's just terrible. And just by taking a look back at your own risk of developing insulin resistance might save you from that path.
Good point. You're right. I've gotten too predictable. You knew where I was going.
All right, so let's go to the Q&A. So I can let you answer all the questions. Gilbert, if you can give us the intro to the Q&A. Thank you. Okay, so I'll let the room for you. Just a quick shout out to James Boras, who just became a YouTube member. Also to GLR, who just became a YouTube member as well. And you can see there they have icon right next to their name. That means they are a YouTube member. And what we just started to do a few months back was starting to address questions from members and people who donate a super chat. So one way to become a member, you see right there, top right corner on your screen. You can click on join, and you became a YouTube member. It's only a couple of months, a couple of bucks a month, but those go a long way to the team that are. I'm in Mexico. We have people in the Philippines. We are hiring more people to help with the practice. So your contributions help a lot. We also have a super chat from Pete Warner, $10. Thank you so much. Good morning. Keep up the good work. And we have another super chat from Response Digital Media, $15. And he has well, this person has a question. How long does it take to stabilize plaque? I'm 65, been low no carb for 3 years now, and my calcium score is still rising. Okay, 550 last year, 670 this year. Is this normal or is this something else going on? We see that a lot, don't we, Dr. Brewer?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I don't know. I will tell you this. It's impossible to say whether it's, to me, and you may have an opinion on this too, and I'd love to hear it. Uh, I, I think it's impossible to say that it's going to be a year versus it's going to be 2 weeks. Once you start correcting your diet, getting the inflammation out of there, start decreasing your body fat, um, decreasing your time with your blood sugars over 140. But I would go back and look at the. We know it's less than a year. We know it's probably more than a week. Where is it in that range? I suspect it's far closer to the short end of that range. But Jesus, what are your thoughts about that?
I was trying to find a question right here. I was gonna cheat a little bit on putting up a question from another person, but
Oh, okay.
it caught my eye because, and if I don't find it, I will just mention what I saw. Somebody that said they're an engineer, and we have a lot of patients that are engineers, and they were like, aren't we using artificial intelligence on medicine, or how we can use that? Here it is, Bobbio Camp, of course, um, because they use it on predictive maintenance and engineering. And how does that relate to the question from responsible digital media? It does, because unfortunately the body works as a machine as well. But sometimes, and a lot of times, medicine is more an art than it is a science. Everybody's the everybody Each body is different, Each body, even though there are theoretical similar mechanisms, they're not the same, and there are a lot of factors that are involved on the way a person can respond to different treatments, to different interventions, and we know most of them work, but we don't know what's how much will they work and when they're going to work, because everybody's different. And we have seen patients that, for example, I can tell you a personal experience with a patient that I have. I had a patient that was a smoker for 50 years. We made a couple of tests. No signs of cancer. No signs of obstructive pulmonary disease. His pulmonary function was really good for his age. A few weeks after that, we had a patient like on their 30s that just started smoking. He was smoking like for 2 years, and he developed lung cancer. So there's a lot of inner characteristics on your own genetics that will let you know uh, how you're gonna improve or not. And it's just so individual. There is no prediction on that side. At least I don't see it. And specifically for this case, and I don't know if you mentioned that, but for a lot of patients we see, when the calcium score is rising, that is actually stabilized plaque. It's very
Mhm.
like
Yeah, I
calcium,
didn't mention that.
and maybe that's the sign you need to understand that your plaque is actually getting stabilized. That's why
That
we see CIMT every year instead of a calcium score to track this, because CIMT is going to show you soft plaque. Calcium score cannot show you soft plaque. And the bottom line is soft plaque is dangerous. It can rupture, create a clot, create a heart attack, and you're done. Calcium score will show calcified plaque, which is actually plaque that is stable, that will not get ruptured and will not create clots. Um, what's the difference within a high calcium score from somebody on low carb doing the right thing and somebody who is not doing all those things? That we don't know how much soft plaque they have. And
right.
persons who are on low carb and doing the right thing and getting some medications if necessary, they're very likely to have only calcified stable plaque. But if you go to again, the guacamole medicine, if you go to a cardiology intensivist, or what do you call interventionist cardiologist, and they
Mhm.
see a calcium score, high calcium score equals a stent.
Yeah.
So just be careful about that, and you will need to have an assessment of your own specific case to really understand if that high calcium score is a risk or not.
This is a really, really good question, response digital media. It's already taken Jesus down 3 or 4 bunny holes. I have a couple more to go down. As Jesus mentioned, watching calcification. I think it's those of us who go into that world of CIMT instead of just calcium scores understand that what's going on with calcification is clearly a healing and stabilization process. You've got inflammation and it's stabilizing that inflammation. And we know that within a couple of months of somebody getting focused in getting into that weight loss journey, especially for somebody that's got 30 pounds to lose, getting into that weight loss journey, within a couple of months, they start calcifying the plaque. So I personally feel like it's probably a month or 3, depending on that individual's what that individual's doing, how quickly their immune system is responding, how how rapid they are in that journey. How badly they were in terms of set up in terms of their daily carb, daily blood sugar processes, and how where they were set in terms of their body fat at that point, and how sharp their decline is in terms of body fat and um, their insulin response to it. So we've seen people that again have lost over 150 pounds. We've seen people that lose like 5 pounds in and more per month, and I haven't seen any studies of groups like that, but uh, and so if you can't find studies, you start relying on people that do it for a living, and we're guys that do that for a living, and it clearly appears that you're starting to stabilize and decrease your cardiovascular risk within a couple of months. Now, then the next question comes: okay, so how long does it take to start healing your eyes? Your retina? How long does it take to start healing kidneys? How long does it take to start healing erectile mechanisms? Again, different questions. I think eyes and especially kidneys take longer to heal. They do heal. We've seen evidence of it. Um, the assumption in the past has always been that none of these things heal. That's not true.
Great question. Thank you so much. And let's go to the other ones that we might have over here. Let me prepare for this one. Peggy Douglas saying, "Good morning from Fairhope." Is that Alabama?
Yes, Fairhope is where we had we still some of the Alabama Project uh, clinics,
Awesome.
just a little bit from the coast there. I can't remember the name of that coast. Orange Beach, some of the other beaches there.
Good. JLR, who just became a YouTube member, my recollection is the guacamole game at the fair where no matter how many moles you whack with the mallet, more pop up. Yes, they do.
Well, I mean, that is the point, GLR. Um, the way we do medicine these days, separating it into the end organ, we're never going to fix this problem. It's going to be like whack-a-mole, like that whack-a-mole game. You try to deal with the eyes, well, then, and you deal with them, the kidneys are going to take you out. You try to deal with the kidneys, the heart's going to take you out. So the point is, let's go back further to the root cause and get out of this whack-a-mole medicine and start dealing with something that's going to reverse all of these processes.
Let's open the door that is uh, below the game and take all those moles out all at once.
Right.
Yeah. GLR. He's a new YouTube member. He sent a couple of questions. That's why we're addressing them first. This was so informative. Thank you. On another note, my understanding has been that having low triglycerides, higher HDL, and pattern A lipids are all good things. And I cannot agree more with that. Do you want to mention something about that?
Sure. Take a look at our other content. One of the first things we do, people think that, well, you look at OGTT, the glucose response, that's your key thing. And that is our key thing. And therefore, looking at cholesterol testing is not helpful. Nothing could be further from the truth. We do fractionation, which most docs don't do because they don't know how to interpret it. But even for a patient that has nothing but a standard lipid profile, a standard cholesterol test, that's very important information exactly because of this. Now, the pattern A lipids is fractionation, but triglycerides and HDL are both on the standard thing that docs look at. And we've got plenty of content, plenty of videos which go into depth explaining why triglycerides and HDL are important. Triglycerides are burned. One of the things that insulin does, we've mentioned insulin many times. Most people, it's got three major purposes, and they all have to do, well, it's got three major purposes. Most people don't realize it. The first one, most people realize it takes glucose out of the blood and puts it into the cell where it's safe. But then it also stops us from burning body fat. And as we mentioned earlier, it's used in making memories. Let's go back for a second to that second item. We haven't mentioned that before, today at least. We've mentioned it many other times. If insulin stops you from burning body fat, then obviously it's going to make you focus more on burning the sugar that's in your blood. So that's the other mechanism for insulin decreasing blood sugar. It forces you to burn it by cutting off burning body fat, as well as taking that glucose and putting it into the cell. But that's maybe a little bit too much detail. But think about it. If you're resistant to insulin, you have to keep pushing insulin out there, and insulin keeps you from burning triglycerides, then no wonder your triglycerides are high if your insulin's too high. If you're constantly pushing out too much insulin, you can't burn your triglycerides. So that's what you see with a healthy teenager. Not one of the new problems where we have teenagers with diabetes, but a healthy teenager, they've got very low triglyceride levels, and they tend to not need to eat as much because they're burning fat. It's like burning diesel. They're burning fat. They're getting a lot of energy out of that body fat. Their triglyceride levels are low.
And the other thing, I wanted to mention two things. One is, remember, those are biomarkers. You're not treating your disease to get
Yes.
just to see good numbers. You wanna see good numbers because they're a reflection or a better metabolic state. So it's not chasing the numbers, because if you want to decrease your triglycerides, there are multiple medications that will do that for you. And fenofibrates, ezetimibe, those work wonders for
Mhm.
that. But they are not going to solve the main issue. The moment you stop taking them, your triglycerides are going to go back to high levels. So it's not about the numbers. It's about what those numbers represent of
Represent.
your inner metabolism.
Mm.
And do you want to hear? I don't think I have told you this story. I do have my own stories as well.
Oh, there
Uh,
we go.
this is uh, it's kind of a scary story. Do you know how people do prevention on the government in Mexico?
Mm-mm.
They ask you for a panel of six studies, of six things. Your metabolic panel has six things: glucose, creatinine, urea, uric acid, total cholesterol, and triglycerides. What's missing there?
Well, did you have glucose?
Yeah,
Did
fast.
you
All of this is fasting.
You do
No,
have triglycerides.
yeah, no
Did you have
LD,
Did you have
no
HDL?
no LDL, no HDL.
Interesting.
So if you have 200 or more of total cholesterol, guess what? They put you on statins.
Interesting.
And it's like, I do a lot of consultations for companies, and some companies hire me to do their medical examinations for their workers, and they say, "Oh, we already have blood work for them. No one has LDL, no one has HDL. I'm lucky if they had a urine exam." It's a scary, and you have a lot of those people. Oh yeah, I'm already taking my 40 milligrams Lipitor.
Based on what?
Total cholesterol,
Ah,
not even LDL,
okay,
total cholesterol.
okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So a lot of
What does
a
that
lot.
tell you?
It tells me two things. We have a lot of work to do on primary care, but also for patients. You will see that patients in Mexico have a really different idea of, you don't get too many patients that are really first worried about their health until something goes wrong. Not a lot of education on the side of prevention, but they don't discuss too much with their doctors as well, especially
Yeah.
people on communities on lower socioeconomical income. um, if the
Yeah.
doctor says something, they just do it, and you'll see a lot of that.
That is the problem. It's all about knowledge and awareness.
Yep. GLR, and that lots of particles and small particles aren't so good. How can those two conditions coexist? It goes with the previous question about saying lots of particles and small particles aren't so good. How can those two conditions coexist? So that goes a lot with the differences between the size of the particles. and and let me know if this is the reasoning behind we don't ask for small dense LDL anymore. There was a lot of research saying small LDL is one of the main risk factors. Small LDL will go through the vessels and accumulate over there. But the thing is, fluffy LDL can do that as well. The only difference is what is the trigger and how that's correlate with inflammation. So we have seen that small LDL is more related and is more likely to perpetuate the inflammation than large LDL. But correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Brewer. Well, and if you want to mention a little bit about this buoyant LDL and differences of LDL sizes.
Yeah, there's so much. There's, at some point we probably should just do a whole long study on small, dense LDL, large, fluffy LDL, and basically just go through a fractionation and and take several fractionations and show the difference. What happens with labs is you get so many different labs, and then you start correlating things, and you don't realize that these two different things you thought were actors are actually not different. They're reflections. They're two aspects of the same thing, and they're bioindicators. They're not actors. They're so a good example of that is quote small dense LDL. We thought that small dense LDL, and most people still think that small dense LDL are actually causing the problem. They may be, but we really don't have that much research on it. Um, what we have noticed is if people have higher particle counts, they tend to have problems. Higher particle count goes right hand in hand with having more small, dense ones. But what we didn't think about was that also goes right hand in hand with loss of those large, fluffy ones. And then we assumed, well, maybe it's those small, dense ones that are causing the problem. As Jesus mentioned a minute ago, it might just be a bioindicator. Maybe the problem is when you have a failed carb metabolism. And this goes back to some stuff from Thomas Dayspring, and Peter Attia did some good work on this in terms of helping people understand this. When you have a failed carb metabolism, the large fluffy LDL as well as the large fluffy HDL start transporting fatty acids instead of cholesterol. Well, a particle that passes through the liver that's laden with fatty acids is metabolized. It's burned up for energy by the liver. In other words, and so therefore you lose the large fluffy LDL, just like you lose the large fluffy HDL, and you end up with nothing but small, dense LDL. So which is the problem here? Or is either one the problem or are both the problems? Is it a problem with having the small, dense LDL? Or is it being missing the large, fluffy LDLs because they've gotten burned up by the liver for fatty acid energy because they were transporting fatty acids instead of cholesterol. There's yet another indicator that has already been mentioned here, type A pattern. And a type A pattern is nothing but having plenty of large, fluffy LDL and not so many small, dense LDL. So that, again, you start looking at these, and it reminds you of the old Buddhist story about 6 blind men and the elephant. You got 6 blind men. They walk up to an elephant, and obviously they're blind. They haven't seen him before. So they try to describe the elephant. And the one in the front feels the trunk, and he says, oh, it's like a snake. It writhes around. It's a long tube. Another one feels that's next to him feels the tusk, and he says, "No, no, it's like a spear. It's hard, and it's pointed at the end." Another one is back behind the elephant, and he feels the tail, and he says, "No, no, no, it's like a rope." And then you know how this goes. And so they get into a debate about what an elephant really is like. And at the end of the day, what you realize is they're all wrong, but they're all right. Or they're all right, but they're all wrong. And that's exactly what we've got going on with this whole debate about, oh, is it A pattern versus B pattern LDLs? Oh no, it's small dense LDL. Oh no, it's loss of the large fluffy LDL. And then we get into this current fad about no, 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 it's ApoB. And again, we got six blind men and a big elephant there causing problems.
Yeah. And it's just what we mentioned. It's not the number. It's what the number means.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Peggy Douglas, where can I get a CIMT? Doc at Jubilee didn't seem to know.
You can call our folks, and I'm sorry that the doc at Jubilee didn't seem to know. You can call our folks if you'd like, 859 721 1414. They can help you get hooked up with a good CIMT. We don't make money from CIMTs, by the way. Disclaimer.
Yeah, we just work with this company because we know they do good quality CMT.
Hey, Sus, just a housekeeping warning. I'm going to have to beg off in 3 minutes.
And I think we have enough time to address just the last 2 or 3 questions. GLR, it sounds like the calcium is kind of like a scab protecting the soft plaque. It's just the process of stabilization of plaque. You get calcium, and that way it's that kind of extra layer that will avoid the plaque to getting ruptured. Of course, you will have the one thing they're really concerned about is the blood flow, and that a lot of calcium might impair blood flow, and impaired blood flow can cause angina and some pain on the chest in really really severe cases. But there's no doubt that calcified plaque is not gonna rupture. So that's the thing here. And Scott stole this made me smile. Guacamole medicine, not guacamole medicine. Well, you will think that as the more time I spend here, I'll get better with this. And
I do like guacamole medicine, though. I mean, it's a nice, healthy, fat, low
it's a
carb.
nice term. Yeah, I might wanna make trademark this for our office.
Guacamole is good medicine.
Yeah. And last, I think this will be the last one. Peggy Douglas requested test on Dr. Brewer's CB inflammation graphic, ApoB, ApoA1, B on 79, A on 157. B was 114, 16 weeks before, and 114.6 months before. Could just 12 days on 5 milligrams of rosuvastatin do that? Trying to understand these numbers. Okay, so B started on 79, and then it was 140, 16 weeks before. Oh, okay, so she saw an improvement from ApoB from 114 to 79 on 16 weeks. On also
could
small
12
degree,
days of rosuvastatin do that? No,
and an increase on ApoA, small increase.
yeah. What do you think?
I don't know. My understanding on the statins is that they don't work right away.
Yeah, I don't think the statin did that.
Yeah, there's
It's
probably
possible that a statin will, help slow things down within a couple of weeks, clearly within a month. But I suspect something else, and I suspect something else was doing that. And as we know, lifestyle is the bigger driver.
and she was already on low carb exercises and supplementing.
Yeah.
So maybe it helped, but as we say with supplements and medications, they are not the distinct solution. They're just add-ons to whatever you're doing already. All right. So I think that's it for the show today. Want to say some closing remarks?
No, it's good to be back.
And come back to the channel for some more guacamole medicine.
That's a good tagline.
Yeah, yeah. Doing some guacamole medicine. We can do something on avocados next time.
That's right. We can put that as a tagline right under the website title.
Sounds good. All right. See you next
Yeah.
Wednesday. Thank you.